Let me tell this crazy story that I encountered back in 2000. It was somewhere between 2000 2004, because that's when I worked in Central California. In the San Joaquin Valley is the agricultural mecca of California, if you're not familiar, already familiar. A small rural town called Delano, California. Relatively small, 30,000 people. Um, a lot of Hispanic workers and Filipino, um, mostly Filipino and Hispanic. So it was a mom and pop owned business, ambulance company. We're right smack in the middle of almond orchards, orange orchards, and grape vineyards, all around. It's an agricultural mecca, 300 miles long and 100 miles wide. And it's very common. Every time we respond to a call, we end up out of the city real quick because it's a very small town. There's only one road going through the town. There's a stoplight, a couple of stoplights, and there's a I-99, the interstate going north-south, right next to the company. There's actually a chain link fence between the city street and the interstate. But this one was out in the orange orchards, and it was east. Um, So we start driving, and usually, once we see on the map where it's going to be, we already know it's going to be 30 minutes before we get there. Many times we're out in the middle of nowhere, and cell phone signals are very weak. The 800 megahertz radio is hardly working, and you're pretty much on your own sometimes as far as communication. So we're responding out into the orange groves, and it was a motor vehicle accident. Fire department's usually on scene way ahead of us because there's more fire departments, than there are paramedic ambulances companies. And sure enough, we arrive. I'm gonna say we got there in 30 minutes or less or something. So we get there, and it was an intersection, uncontrolled intersection, no stop signs either way, going this way or this way. And what I see is like a stake bed truck, a flatbed truck with the wood railings on the side, and it's a produce truck. They use it for produce, and it happened to be probably filled with oranges, crates of oranges. And there was another smaller car that collided with each other at an intersection. It's one of those, somebody didn't slow down to see if anybody was coming, and they both barreled through the intersection. And this giant stake bed, I'm going to say it was like an F-350 or something, obviously uh, won the battle. And the small car was, I don't remember what it was, but I'm going to say it was like a Toyota or a two-door Honda or something. And a female was driving the small car, and a guy was driving the truck, and he was unhurt, and there was produce everywhere on the road. Both vehicles are damaged, but the small car is the obvious one that's stopped dead in the middle of the intersection, and it's got front end damage beyond front end damage. The bumper's up against the firewall, and there's a person in the driver's seat, and it's a female, and she looks in a real bad way. She's entrapped, and didn't. My first initial guesstimate was she was dead on scene, but it had just happened, or relatively speaking, it had just happened, and she was still warm. So the firefighters were asking me, what do you want to do? And I said, let's get her out, and we'll go from there and see if she's viable or if there's anything. So I remember them putting a yellow blanket, just something over her to try to protect her while they start tearing apart the car. Removing the windshield, the door. They have fun playing with their toys and disassembling a vehicle to access a patient. Meanwhile, a firefighter's tapping me on the shoulder and he's like, I think you need to take a look at the back seat. And I'm looking in the back seat and I see a car seat, a child, an infant car seat. And I said, okay. And they're like, but we haven't found any child. And I said, okay. Uh, I noted that. And they said, we're looking, but we've been looking before you got here and we haven't found anything. We've looked in the car, we've looked around the car. So as far as whether or not there was even anything in there in the first place, we don't know. But we're going to assume there was until otherwise. So I noted that, and meanwhile, the noise is starting to elevate, and their hydraulics and their tools and their cutting, starting to tear this car apart. And I go wandering around to the passenger side, and I realize, okay, there's really nobody here, no other patients other than the driver of the stake bed and the driver of this small car, and a possible infant somewhere. But in the meantime, we've got an entrapped patient, and that appears to be really if the only patient. So I go wandering around to the passenger side, and I just want to make sure, they didn't miss anything. I'm looking under the vehicle, um, don't see anything. I look in the driver's side. The dashboard is really deformed, and it's come in, like I said, it's come into the driver's space. The steering wheel is literally through this lady, and pinned her against her seat. And, I won't go into detail. You can imagine. I'm, you can't even see down in the footwell. It's that collapsed. And I'm at the passenger side. So I look in the back seat, and I'm looking underneath um, I think I looked underneath the driver's seat in the back, and then I went around to the passenger side and I looked underneath the passenger seat from the back. Didn't see anything there. I'm looking in the back seat again. You're just trying to put things together. Where else could this child be? Was it ejected? That's probably the most likely case, that it left the vehicle and it's outside somewhere. Well, I'm about to concede that, the car's clear and I'm going to go look elsewhere and wait for this lady to be extricated. And I was kneeling in the passenger seat, and there's glass, everywhere. And I step back onto my feet, and right as I turned to walk away from the car, my left eye caught something down on this small little hole that was still visible down to the floor, into the footwell. And I saw it, and it was a sock. It was a little white sock. So the first thing I, keyed in on was that's a baby sock, and it was white. And I I got down on my hands and knees onto the asphalt, and I looked into this hole, and lo and behold, it was a foot. And I put my hand in the hole and I grabbed it, and I realized, oh my Lord, I've got an infant in my hand. I grabbed its foot and I was able to, extricate the extremities and the torso out this hole. And, the infant was unconscious and she was cyanotic, blue everywhere and, not breathing. And I walked around with it over around the other side of the car, and the gurney was already out. So I went ahead and put the child on this gurney, and I started my assessment, and it wasn't breathing. So I had somebody breathe for me, a little pediatric ambu bag, and started an ambu bag, by the way, to those that aren't familiar. It's just basically that big bellow. You've probably seen it on TV. It's a big bellow, oval shaped bag that you squeeze. It's got air in it, and you attach it to oxygen. You ventilate with this bag. It's called an ambu bag. We're ventilating, the best we can, and I know I need to put a tube into the child's trachea. That's the best treatment for a non-breathing patient, whether it's a child, a baby, or an adult, is to put a breathing tube down into the mouth, down into the trachea, and it's just shy of the lungs. And then you inflate a balloon with a syringe, and then you attach the ambu bag to that tube, and you can breathe directly into their lungs and expand their chest that way. So um, I end up being successful intubating this child. We find out it does have a heartbeat. So we're not doing CPR, we're just ventilating it. And then we're trying to get an IV established. We're trying to access its vein in case we need to give medications. Well, we're having a hard time, which is very common for pediatrics, to start an IV in a infant that small. So we have what we call an intraosseous needle, which goes directly into the bone, say the lower leg, just below the knee, and into the tibia, the tibia plateau, it's called. It's a flat part of the tibia bone, the lower leg bone. And you literally screw a a needle into the middle of the bone, into the marrow, and then you secure it onto the leg, and you attach an IV right to that, and you can drip fluid and medication into the bone, into the marrow of a bone, of an infant's bone. So we got that established, and it had, like I said, it had a heartbeat and it had a pulse, but it wasn't breathing, and we don't know how long, it wasn't breathing, but and firefighter asked me if I wanted a helicopter, and we're out in the middle of Timbuktu, so the answer is yeah, get a helicopter coming. We are probably an hour away from a trauma center, and we're 30 minutes plus back to the town of Delano. So helicopter's been dispatched and it's on its way. Well, meanwhile, the mother is freed, and we determined pretty much that she was DRT. You're familiar with the DRT? It's pun thrown into a bad scene, but it's dead right there. And she was. And so we went ahead and just called her there in her, literally in her driver's seat. So we pronounced the mom, and now we've got what looked like maybe a viable, pediatric. And the helicopter eventually came. It's a hurry up and wait, a long wait when you got a critical patient like that. But you have to kind of decide, do you cut butt for the hut? Do you run with the patient and go to a hospital? Or is it going to be quicker if you wait for the helicopter and get them in the bird, and then, it's a short transport, relatively speaking, for them. So we waited for the helicopter, and I remember the helicopter arrives, and there's a paramedic on the helicopter, and he comes over and asks me, what happened, and I basically tell him an abbreviated version of the story I just told you, and we handed it off to him, and uh, he took the pediatric away. Sometimes we do get a follow up from the helicopter crew. It's either a thank you letter or a FYI, this is how the patient did or didn't do. But I don't remember what happened to that child. But yeah, what a chance, right? Firefighters didn't see it. Um, Police officers that were on scene didn't see it, didn't find it. And I just happened to spend a little bit more time, I guess, in the vehicle. Yeah, I saw that little white sock. All right, guys. Thank you for listening. Thanks for coming. As you were. See ya.